Let me ask you something. You're an adult. You pay bills, you make decisions, maybe you manage a team or raise kids or handle genuinely difficult things every single day. And yet, when the lights go out at night, something in you feels just a little better knowing there's a soft glow somewhere in the room. Maybe it's a plug-in light by the bathroom. Maybe it's the dim backlight of a charging device you conveniently never fully cover. Maybe you've never admitted this out loud to anyone. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because here's what most people assume. They assume that sleeping with a night light is something children do. Something you're supposed to grow out of, like training wheels or believing in the tooth fairy. And if you haven't, well, the joke writes itself, right? But psychology tells a completely different story. And honestly, once you understand what's actually happening in the brain of an adult who keeps that little light on, you might stop treating it like a quirk and start seeing it as something far more fascinating. So let's get into it. Your brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. All day long, it is scanning, calculating, anticipating. It wants to know what's coming next so that it can keep you safe. And in the daylight, that job is relatively easy. You can see your environment. You can process it. Your nervous system stays relatively settled. But then darkness arrives. And for your brain, total darkness isn't just an absence of light. It's an absence of information. And your brain absolutely hates missing information. Think about it this way. Imagine being asked to walk through a room you've never been in before, completely blindfolded, with no idea what's in there. Most people feel immediate discomfort at that idea. Now, imagine the same room, same situation, but someone hands you a small flashlight. Suddenly, it's manageable. You haven't changed the room. You haven't removed any of the uncertainty. But your nervous system exhales. That's essentially what a night light does for the adult brain that still responds to darkness with low-level alertness. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Researchers who study anxiety and sensory processing have found that a significant number of adults experience what's called hypervigilance in low-stimulation environments. Darkness, silence, stillness. These conditions, rather than being relaxing, actually trigger a state of heightened alertness in certain nervous systems. The brain, unable to confirm that the environment is safe because it literally cannot see it, stays partially activated. A night light isn't weakness. For these individuals, it's a legitimate neurological accommodation. Now let's talk about where this often starts. Because for most adults who sleep with a night light, the story begins somewhere in childhood. Not necessarily with a single traumatic event, though that can be part of it, but often with something more subtle. A period of uncertainty. A time when nighttime felt unpredictable. Maybe there was conflict in the home. Maybe you were sick and disoriented in the dark. Maybe you simply had an imagination so vivid that darkness became a canvas for every fear you couldn't articulate. The brain learned during those formative years that light equals safety. And let me tell you something about the brain. It is an extraordinarily loyal student. It keeps the lessons it learns long after the classroom is gone. This is what psychologists call a conditioned association. Light became emotionally anchored to safety, calm, and control. And even as you grew into an adult with logic and reason and the full knowledge that there is nothing under your bed, that emotional anchor doesn't simply dissolve. It lives in a part of your nervous system that predates your rational mind entirely. There's also something worth naming here that often gets overlooked. Adults who sleep with a night light frequently score higher in traits like sensitivity, creativity, and emotional depth. These are individuals whose inner worlds are rich and active. Even in sleep, the mind doesn't fully switch off. It processes. It imagines. It stays engaged with the world in ways that other nervous systems simply don't. The night light, in this context, isn't a sign that the mind is fragile. It's actually a trace of how deeply that mind has always engaged with its environment. And then there's comfort. Simple, uncomplicated, deeply human comfort. Not everything needs a disorder attached to it. Sometimes a soft glow at night is the adult equivalent of a warm cup of tea or a familiar song. It creates a sensory environment that tells your body, you are home, you are safe, you can rest now. There is nothing scientifically flawed about seeking comfort. In fact, sleep research consistently shows that people fall asleep faster and sleep more deeply in environments their nervous system associates with safety. If a nightlight is part of that equation for you, it is literally helping your body do what it needs to do. So here's the perspective shift I want to leave you with. That little light isn't a confession of fear. It's evidence of self-awareness. You know what your nervous system needs. You've quietly, without fanfare, created the conditions for your own rest. In a world that constantly tells people to push through discomfort and dismiss their own signals, you've done the opposite. You listened. You responded. You chose sleep over pride. That is not childish. That is, in the truest sense, one of the most adult things a person can do. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who gets it. And if you're curious about what other everyday behaviors reveal about the deeper workings of the human mind, stick around. There's a lot more where this came from.